everything that you will see on frame, it's either it did exist, could have existed, but everything is provable. Everything is backed up by fact.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. My name is Dalal, and you are listening to the Popcorn and Soda Podcast, the show where we discuss all things movies, pop culture, and so much more. I want to thank each and every one of you for making me a small part of your day. In today's show, we're joined by a very special guest. He is one of the finest cinematographers in the industry today. He has shot projects such as It Chapter 2, The 33, and Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. His work will next be seen on Dopesick, a miniseries that tackles the American opiate crisis, streaming on HULU October 13th. On the show today, the very talented Mr. Checco Varese. How are you, Checco?
Thank you so much, Talal, and thank you for the introduction. I'll record it and I'll save it for posterity.
Hey, my pleasure. I'll take it. Checco, how have you been over this last 18 months? We're living in such a crazy world. How have you been over the last year and a half?
I have to say that we are few of the lucky people that had a backyard, have a wonderful 14-year-old daughter, a wife that is a filmmaker, and we survived the first few months. It was very hard. It was especially very hard to see what was happening around us. Especially hard to see the lack of work and the lack of possibilities of work, and that was very stressing. But at the same time, it was a time to, I'm a son of immigrants from Italy in the Second World War, so I went back to all my father's stories of not very politically correct, wrapping lettuce leaves and let them and dry and smoking as if it were tobacco, or using the same fish and dipping into the soup many times to make 3 or 4 times soup. We didn't get to that extent, but the survival instinct of someone that heard those stories clicked to me. I was lucky enough to work in documentaries and news in the 80s. And I remember interviewing then very young Dr. Fauci in a documentary about AIDS, another pandemic that he faced. And he was as brilliant and as pedagogic as he was in the last couple of years. And seeing him was a refreshing event.
I can imagine. That's really interesting you bring that up because you've seen firsthand pandemic 20, 30 years ago. Now, here we are 30 years, 35 years later after the AIDS pandemic. And now the world looks completely different than it was back then with technology, social media. We're so connected more than ever before. I find that so fascinating that you kind of have a different perspective on both timelines almost.
Yeah, and luckily enough, I in my past is basically I'm a news cameraman and a documentary cameraman. So I was in Africa during the Congo Ebola 87, and I was in cholera in Peru during the cholera outbreak. And you just see that humanity is very fragile, and the only thing that really it's timeless and really is important is solidarity and common sense and care for the one that is near you, which is a very rare event in some part of the world lately. But it's probably the subject of another podcast. But the only thing that matters is that you care for your neighbor, and your cousin and your brother and your enemy. It doesn't matter. You care for the human beings that are around you. And I've seen that around the world throughout my life, and that's what keeps me sort of alive and waking up every morning and saying there is hope.
Well, that's a beautiful perspective. And hey, as we enter the second half of this year and with vaccinations going up, and I know it's still a little crazy out there, but here's hoping to a more better second half of this year with, again, there's a lot of positives to take away from a pandemic like this. I know that's difficult to say,
Yeah,
but a lot of people have found a lot of internal solace. And as you mentioned, it's the little things that matter and what make up the big picture at the end of the day.
I agree. And also we're lucky in this industry that we were very supported by science, and then we started working when nobody else was working, with a face mask, with a shield, with a test every day, and thank God the vaccine, and without talking to anyone other than 6 feet away or texting. But we made Dopesick, which is this show we're talking today about it, during the, I would say, the height of the later height of the COVID-19.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's dive right in. Before we get into Dopesick, I'm really fascinated by your story, Checco, especially being a person of color myself. Where does this all begin for you? What were some of your early influences? And ultimately, what made you want to be in the creative arts?
I come from a family of intellectuals. My father was a very liberal lawyer. Then they turned into jewelers. My brothers were sociologists, anthropologists. And I wanted to be an architect. So I went and studied architecture and came back to Peru. I'm from Lima, from an Italian family. Came back and said, all these Peruvians don't know how to build. I'm going to change everything. I'm going to make it better. And sure enough, economical crisis, 348 of the decade were like hyperinflation. This is early 80s, very early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. A friend of mine said, what are you doing? I said, nothing. I just came back. There is no work. Nobody's building anything. He goes, I have an adventure travel company. I said, adventure travel? Are you going to pay me? Of course. So I showed up in the office, and the very next day, a guy at the end of the office picked up the phone in English and said, hey, you, the new one, you speak English? I said, yeah. And do you know anything about photography? And I said, yeah, of course. I did some black and white photography in architecture school. And he answered, yes, we have a camera assistant. And hang up. And I'm like, what? National Geographic was coming to do a documentary in Peru. And here I was 3 days later. I said, I'm not going to do anything else. And then I came to Washington. I did 29 documentaries with them as a camera assistant and a cameraman. And then I came back to Washington. I came to live in Washington, D.C. And it slowed down the work because of the season and the change of regime at National Geographic. Some people left and they were changing. And a friend of mine said, there is this small company called CN something, out of Atlanta. Ended up being CNN. There was a third floor in a little office in the Ted Turner building. So I went and visited them, and they said, hey, you speak Spanish? Yes, I said, I speak Spanish. Okay, we need a cameraman in El Salvador. So there I go, and I became a news cameraman and a war correspondent for 14 years. And that was one thing led to the next one. I did second unit in features, Steadicam, because I thought it was an interesting tool. Then a plethora of music videos in the 90s, and then narrative. Now, I don't know where it all started. I also know that I stumbled upon it unwillingly. I actually really would love to have been a chef, but then again, I cook with light as opposed to cooking with mushrooms or pasta.
Oh, that's really interesting you bring that up. And you kind of touched upon it just now. My next question, the journey of a creative artist. It's a very interesting one because it's one of those fields where you really need to be in love with what you do. So I'm curious, when you were starting off your journey, did you find it to be a linear trajectory where you did one job followed by another, followed by another? Or was it in many ways a roller coaster where you had the highs of the highs, the lows of the lows, a loop in the middle? What was your trajectory like?
First of all, to whoever is listening to this, do not follow my path. It's the most convoluted, complex, difficult, long path. Fantastic, but oh no, it's it's never linear. I mean, I would say it's linear probably in 4 places in the world, like Los Angeles, because there is or there was an industry in the 70s, 80s. London, maybe Toronto, of course, because it's a service industry and there is a lot of business there. Nowadays, I don't know, Shanghai probably, and Paris in the 60s. But everywhere else in the world, you're completely out of your mind if you want to work in this business. It's, you know, rowing up the hill, rowing up the river, climbing the hill, the Sisyphus anecdote of the rock falling onto you, you know, you finish a job and you're like, oh my God, I'm so happy. This is great. 2 weeks later, you're a freelance. When is the next job coming? It's a roller coaster. But I don't know if I know how to do anything else. So probably I'm stuck into the wonderful feeling of anxiety and lack of security. And even today, after 30 years, lack of knowledge of what's going to happen. I'm doing a job right now that I know is going to be done by the end of December, whatever, Christmas. What am I going to do in January? Sleep, you know, for sure. What am I gonna do in February? Oh my God, I have no idea.
The life of a creative artist, right? It's a thread that I've heard in your answer and most of the people I've spoken to. It's very true. There's something within a lot of us, most of us almost, that we almost don't know what else to do. In some way, shape, or form, this industry, the arts, finding a way to express ourselves, that's what we really are born to do, in my opinion. In many ways, there's people that like to be doctors, lawyers, engineers, and they've got that mind and those skills to apply themselves in those fields. But then there's someone like yourself who falls in love with the arts in a different method. And it doesn't mean that you're not equally as intelligent or as amazing in your own skill set as someone else, but it's just fascinating how like the left brain and the right brain side of the path we choose to go down on.
Especially, and this is my personal interpretation, and I may differ with my colleagues or not. I think a cinematographer is half the logistical sergeant in a large army, you know, that you got to make sure they all have blankets or the Peace Corps or Médecins Sans Frontières. I don't want to relate it to an army because the analogy is probably not, but you know, you're dealing with a refugee crisis of 100,000 people. You need so many blankets, you need so many this, so many that, and the other side. So that's one side of your brain. And it's like the lighting, the day, the thing, the resources, the time allotted, my watch. Do I have 10 minutes? I have 15 minutes. Then is this other part, which is I put myself always in the place of the audience. And if I don't believe what I see, and I don't mean the actors because that's not my life, but if I don't believe that dark corner hides a monster, if I don't believe that, the audience won't believe it because I'm biased. I should believe it because I created that part of that world. So I should believe it. So if I don't believe it, so there's these two worlds that collide constantly. The will to make it more artistic, more interesting, more realistic, or less artistic, darker, brighter. And then there's this other world that says, I have 10 minutes. The crane that I wanted for that shot is in the other stage. I cannot use it. So how do I do it?
Right.
And it's always a dichotomy. It's always like you're in between being a creative force and an accountant, you know, and I'm not saying that the accountants are not creative, but you're basically counting bolts in a hardware store and also building architectural sculptures with the same bolts that you counted. So you're always in between, and it's fascinating to me.
It's a very interesting answer there, Checco. And let's apply that and transition into your next upcoming project, Dopesick. This miniseries has such an all-star team in front of the camera and behind. It stars Michael Keaton, Will Poulter, Michael Stuhlbarg, Rosario Dawson, then behind the camera, yourself, Barry Levinson, Danny Strong. It tackles a very serious issue with the American opioid crisis, specifically with the rise of Oxycontin, What drew you to this project?
I've always been fascinated by human suffering and by human happiness. I'm not a big, and I've done my share of horror movies and horror, and I'm not, I wouldn't read the books. I watch the movies because I'm interested, but I'm not a fan. I wouldn't say, oh my God, I'll run to the next horror movie. But yes, oh my God, I'll run to the next All the President's Men, or the next The Deer Hunter, or the next, I don't know, the next movie that deals with human condition. I know Danny Strong. I've known Danny Strong for a long time. We crossed paths in a couple of projects. I'm married to a director, Patricia Regan, and she was offered 2 of the episodes, episode 5 and 6. And so Barry Levinson interviewed several cinematographers, and one of them was me, because I knew Danny, and Danny sort of said, do you want to do it? I cannot offer it to you because it's Barry's pilot. And I had a great conversation with Barry, and literally 5 minutes later, I got a phone call that said, the job is yours. And I was intrigued by the fact that it was the middle of the pandemic. I would take a plane, go to Richmond. We live in Los Angeles. I would take a plane, go to Richmond, and not see my family until Christmas, maybe, because, you know, quarantine, no quarantine. Do I travel during Christmas? I mean, and then I knew I was done at the end of May. So sometimes I feel like I'm a submarine captain. You know, you go and say goodbye to everybody, and the periscope goes down, and it's a nuclear submarine. You go underwater for 6 months, and you come up on the other side and go, oh, hi, everybody, I'm back here. So that's how I got involved. And my passion for the project starts with, I know the story because, unfortunately, most of us know someone that got addicted to opioids. I didn't know the intricacies of the story. And Danny Strong, which wrote the story and directed 2 of the episodes and showrun the whole thing, did an amazing research. And everything that you will see on frame, it's either it did exist, could have existed, but everything is provable. Everything is backed up by fact. There are, obviously, it's not a documentary, so we created characters.
Right.
But those facts exist. And it's fascinating how nobody has talked about it. In a more, I remember during the AIDS era, everybody was afraid for obvious reasons, because that is like you love someone and you embrace them, and then you die. Here is, you trust your doctor. It's like your preacher, your priest, your rabbi, your mueddin, you know, whatever. You trust them. You go and confess. And he says, oh, no, don't worry about it. Take this. That's good for you. You get hooked, your family gets hooked, and then you die. But the most trustworthy person, either willingly or completely innocently and unwillingly. And with the confluence of, I would say, with the confluence of greed and capitalism, you know, is the confluence of what the only thing that matters is the shareholders, you know, the only thing that matters is the dollar sign. And no, doesn't matter if we pollute the world and burn oil, doesn't matter if we sell you cigarettes and you die of cancer, just, and it's the same concept. And to me, it was fascinating how Danny, and I'm applying my political views to this, and maybe shared or not, but it's how Danny really captured that, and with the help of Barry Levinson, Michael Cuesta, Patricia Regan, and Danny himself in the last 2 episodes.
Yeah. Now, having a chance to see the series, it's really fascinating how the story is told from a various different perspectives, whether it's a doctor in this blue collar mining community, the DEA, these pharmaceutical companies. All these perspectives have their own identity as I'm watching this. So what was your approach to shooting the show?
I had to come up with a visual approach, with a visual language. And there are tools to come up with. You choose a certain set of lenses and optics that gives you a certain flair and flavor. You choose a certain camera because it gives you that color and it gives you the ability to dig into the darkness at night. Or choose your lenses and your camera, and you choose your camera language, and you choose the grammar within the language. You choose your language as English, and then you choose, okay, am I gonna write in prose? I'm gonna write in poetry. Is this an epigram? It's like little sentences. Or is it an ode and it's very long sentences? So the camera to me are the commas and the call-ins and the accents and the three dots at the end that allows you to read a sentence in certain way. Camera language, it's made of lenses, camera movements, and etc. And I think it's like the commas and the call-ins and the highlights that gives you the sense. In my view, there are three worlds. Is the world of the victims, the doctors, the miners, the pharmacist, and that's the blue collar world, you know. Then there is the world in the middle, which is intersected by this world and the other world of the civil servants or the government, that it's either the prosecutors that try to find the truth and put these people in jail. It's the DEA that tries to help these prosecutors and find what's happening. You know, they have more issues with that than with cocaine coming from across the ocean. There is also the FDA that, or some people at the FDA that illegally or illicitly gave Purdue Pharma a label that is non-addictive, and then 3 months later or 2 years later ended up working as an executive at Purdue Pharma with 100 times the salary. And it's the Department of Justice that didn't want to offend the Purdue Pharma, but wanted to find out. So this is world in the middle. And then there is the world of Purdue Pharma, which is the rich people, the people that don't care about the results. Within them, there is someone that cares, someone that doesn't know. Are they doing it on purpose, or it doesn't matter, or they blame the guy that got addicted? So there are three worlds. So the first world to me was the working class, a little bit more bluer, a little colder, because it's, mind you, it's the Appalachian and it's winter. So, and it's this world, yet very proud, you know, very clean, poor or humble, but very proud. I mean, the kitchen counter was spotless clean. It wasn't perfect. No, it was chipped, it was old, but it was spotless clean. And the floor, it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't full of trash. So you have to, as a cinematographer, as a storyteller, give them pride. And then the center world was this straightforward tie, jacket, you know, clean cut prosecutor that fought for 12 years, I believe, to prosecute this case. And on the other side, the Sassler family and everybody around them that flew private jets, that own half of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, that donated, that bought paintings for hundreds of millions of dollars and donated to charity, and still push the drugs to everyone. This world was a little warmer and gold and glimmery. This world in the center was antiseptic and efficient, and this world to the left of the miners was this world full of hopes and full of pride and hardworking, patriotic, you know, believers. And it was very interesting how they intersect, because nothing is linear, everything is circular. You know, nothing is linear. I come from a world where the Andes in Peru and the indigenous community, the time doesn't exist. Time is circular, it's not linear. So you go back to commit your own mistakes and you go up. So in this story, nothing is linear, everything is circular. The good guys are the bad guys are the good guys, and you don't know. And at the end of the day, you understand that we're all victims of greed.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. That's so true. And that's something that I took away from watching the show is it's shades of gray. There's no black or white. There's a lot of gray, and some of the just the different characters in the show and their motivations. It's hard to see when someone's actually trying to do the right thing or not, but you can tell that there is a conflict between a lot of these characters. And one thing, as I mentioned earlier, it's truly a masterclass of who's who of creative artists in this industry. You mentioned you shot this during the height of the pandemic. Now, what was your biggest challenge during that entire time frame when you were shooting this miniseries?
That's a very hard question. So I think there are personal challenges, like mine, challenges that I had.
Yeah.
And it's the challenge of being the example to my crew and my peers, of being the one that never take the mask off, that has the shield, that don't shake hands, that don't hug anyone, which is completely against my culture. And the first thing I go is go and hug someone, you know. And that was my personal challenge, to be an example if I could, and I wasn't, for sure not a perfect example, of respect the rules, because I know the rules will keep us safe and will keep us going. That was the personal. It was very hard. It was extraordinarily hard to work in winter with your breath into the shield that starts dampening. You don't see anything. And then all of a sudden you lift the shield and you look at the young girl or boy that is in charge of COVID that looks at you and you go, oh, sorry. So you take a handkerchief, clean it back, and it starts dripping. And then it freezes. It just miserable. That's one thing. And the creative challenge was to keep the camera language somehow within the realm of a cinematic experience, with the subject matter that is so dark, but it's also so full of facts. You know, you have speeches that are 2 minutes by fantastically talented actors, but you have to still keep the audience engaged. So that was a very challenging. Thank God I had the direction of Barry Levinson, that established a wonderful camera language and a wonderful camera, the curiosity of the camera. I define Dopesick as a curious camera. You know, it's like the curiosity of the audience. We have to fulfill that curiosity constantly.
Yeah, and just watching this miniseries, it's a monumentous feat, in my opinion. When you watch it, it doesn't look like that there is a pandemic going on or anything like that. It just seems like just any other TV show or movie that you may have seen prior to this pandemic. It's hard to see the blurred lines as to, all right, you can tell at this point that they were maybe social distancing or that. You guys found a way to make the show just feel natural. And I think that's one of the amazing feats of it.
Yeah. And we had all the support of the production in terms of ventilation and mask and this and that, but it's also an homage to the crew itself. I don't know the numbers I don't know what happened, but none of what we call the A members of the crew got quarantined. There was like a collateral. There was somebody in the art department, somebody on the transportation department, but in the outskirts of the center of the crew. But none of us in 9 months, thank God, neither got a false positive or anything. We never stopped. We stopped half a day for other reasons. You know, so there was like a storm and a thing and a thing. There was a false positive, and you say, okay, let's go home this afternoon. We'll figure it out tomorrow. But we didn't stop for 2 weeks because there was one irresponsible person that went to a, rave in Paris. No. And we were very distantly close to each other.
I'm so excited for viewers to watch this show. It's got award season plaster all over it, and I love that. Dopesick is going to premiere on October 13th on Hulu. I want to transition into another one of your projects that I absolutely adore. And being a massive horror fanatic myself, I loved how you captured it Chapter 2, and specifically Bill Skarsgård's performance as Pennywise. Now, I want to ask you about this one specific scene that just stands out to me till this day. Now, one of the very first shots of Pennywise is that introduction scene in the river where we see this guy that's been thrown in there and he's drowning and submerging in and out of water. And every time he rises up, we see a blurred glimpse of Pennywise getting closer and closer. I just love that shot. Do you recall what specifically went into that and the direction from Andy Muschietti?
Andy is a visionary, and Andy is a very tactile director. He almost, if he could touch the screen, like I'm gonna put my finger in front of the camera, he could touch the screen and do this and pull my head this way and your head that way and rearrange everything to his will. He would. He can't, but so he was very specific on how he wanted it. There was Pennywise was there. Bill Sarsgaard was in the full regalia, which is an extraordinary amount of work in wardrobe and makeup, prosthetics and blah, blah, blah. And then we were in a very small, shallow river near the location. And it happened to be salmon season. So the salmon were going that way or this way, whichever way they were going. So the camera was going there and the salmon was jumping in front of the camera, literally. Salmon this big, you know. So and we had a cameraman with a wetsuit, cold, winter-ish, I guess, or cold anyway. Everything is cold in Toronto anyway. And we had a camera a little bit under the water and above the water, and we were very precisely moving it like that. And then we ended up putting the camera in some kind of a fish tank. So the camera was dry, but the water was in front of the lens. So we could really control the amount of water that was dripping, not in the lens itself, obviously, but in the fish tank. So that's how it ended up being. Most of it, Chapter 2, it's done on camera. I mean, there is a massive amount of visual effects, obviously, you know, but most of what you see of Bill Sarsgaard's real character in person, not when he's big, but most is done on camera. And that's an homage to Andy and the makeup department and the prosthetic department. And of course, the visual effects department that helped us.
Mm-hmm. Now, in many ways, you are viewer number 0. You're watching the movie through your lens. And you mentioned it earlier, if you as an audience member doesn't believe that there's something dark and something creepy hiding in there, you personally know it's not going to work. So I've always been fascinated by this. Being a veteran in the industry as yourself, who's seen thousands of performances through your eyes and through your lens, as you're capturing the movie, could you tell that what Bill was doing was something truly special?
I could tell that what Bill was doing was something special. What the 4 friends, whether they were adults or kids, was special. In my career, I've gone a few times to a director and whisper in his ear, I didn't believe this. So, and he would say, yes, I agree. Or, no, don't worry, because this is what I'm going to do with it. But I always have this thing. It's like, I didn't believe it. You know, I didn't think it was funny. I didn't think it was sad. I didn't think it was scary. I didn't think. So you are patient number 0. Sorry, viewer
number 0.
yeah, I'm patient 0. I always tell my operators and tell myself, the viewfinder is like the lie detector. You know, it's there. You're the first person and the last, you're seeing it like a guy in a theater, not like a guy in an iPhone, because then, you know, the car is coming and the birds are there and I'm checking my email here. But if you're in a theater, it's the same feeling as being the viewfinder of the camera. And if I don't believe it, well, I have a hard time to believe that the audience will. And of course, you need to extrapolate. I mean, Godzilla doesn't really exist. There is a guy with a big tennis ball that hits the building, and then
Yeah.
they'll destroy the building. But within that in mind, I have to understand and I have to believe what I see.
Absolutely. And you capture that in It Chapter 2 so well. And that's one of the things that really stood out to me as a movie fan. And I know it's different because for the casual moviegoer, they don't realize those little tiny details that someone like yourself or I would notice. But that's the things you really appreciate. And that's one thing I love about your work is it's the little things that make the big picture big. And that's just something you're masterful at. Now, I'm really fascinated by this. What do you feel is the future of this industry? You mentioned people potentially watching things on their iPhones or on their cell phones. Streaming is now a big thing. Dopesick is going to be streaming on HULU. What's the future of creative arts, film, television, in your opinion?
I think, pandemic aside, I think we live a very interesting moment. We live the moment of a very strong audience and a very multinational and multicultural audience.
Right.
I think there are more cell phones in Africa now. I read this. There are more cell phones today in Africa than television sets in the whole North America in 1980.
Jeez. Yeah.
So you're talking about 300 million cell phones. They want their content and they want their stories. They don't want, I will be completely non-politically correct, they don't want Iron Man to saving everyone. They want their own Iron Man. They want their own, in Spanish, we don't want the Mexican shore with mustaches always being the drug dealers. We want them. So I think it's a very fertile ground for creators. Then nowadays, when I started, you needed a film camera and you needed a lab and you needed $1,000 or whatever, $400 for each roll of film, and that roll will be developed and you need to transfer. Now you pretty much need a computer and a camera somehow, and you can tell a story. We're storytellers. I think this is the Gutenberg time of printing. You and I talking, I don't know where you are, but you're probably
I'm in Toronto. I'm in Toronto.
Okay. So you and I are talking. I see you as if you were across the street from me. I'm in Los Angeles, and that's very bright back there. This is magic. This is, I remember the first time I saw a fax machine and the paper came out and like, oh my God, that's the future. So what is the future industry? I think we need to tell more stories that relate directly to people. I mean, hopefully we'll have every single Marvel movie and big disaster movie and another one about the hurricane, whatever, and destroying New York for 1,000 times. I hope we still have those, because I would love to work in one of those and I'm happy with that. I hope we have another It and another Pennywise, maybe not It, but a version of that. But I also think there's stories for everyone. There's stories for people, and no matter where you watch them, you have to convince me I'm watching something that is worth my time. And because of that, I think the creative part is even more important, ever so more important. Every day it's more important to be an art director, a writer, an actor, a wardrobe, a critic, a commentator, a film fan. I mean, those are not gonna go away. My profession is not gonna go away. Maybe the projectionist, unfortunately, the projectionist may go away because you just hit the button and it projects by itself. But anybody that has an artistic input is gonna stay. I mean, computer graphic guys. I mean, yes, of course, every movie is a computer graphic something. So I'm a very, very, very optimistic about that. I'm not optimistic about whether it's theater or home theater or cell phone or iPhone. I don't think it matters ultimately. I don't think it really matters. I have this theory that the filmmakers, we are the memories. We're the history keepers of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. I mean, this century is gonna be remembered, last century and this, gonna be remembered, you know, like the Renaissance was remembered by the paintings, and the Romans were remembered by the big roads and constructions, and the Chinese by their pottery and the acupuncture. We as a humanity are gonna be remembered in this century by the movies and the television and the Potemkin and the people climbing up the stairs and being shot by the white czarist and the killing of the young soldier in Saving Private Ryan, or holding hand in the top of the building in You Got Mail, you know, whatever it is, you know, that's the story of this century, and we are the memory keepers, and our responsibility is to make it every time better. I think.
It's amazing words. It's amazing words of wisdom there from the great Checco Varese. As we wrap up, it is now time for a segment I call the final act. Checco, I'm going to ask you 10 rapid fire questions about your likes, your dislikes. I just want the first thing that pops in your mind. But here's a catch. We're going to try to get through it in 60 seconds or less. Are you up for it?
Yeah.
Movies or TV shows?
Both.
Theater or watch at home?
Theater.
Favorite movie?
Long list.
All right, let's skip that one. Favorite TV show?
The last one I watched yesterday night.
All right, favorite trilogy?
Matrix.
One sequel better than the original?
None.
Summer or fall?
Actually, each chapter 2, I'll get back. Each chapter 1.
There we
Each
go.
chapter
All right,
1.
how's it going?
It.
There we All right, summer or fall?
Summer.
All right, this one's going to be a lovely one. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
No.
Film or digital?
Digital, because I live in this time.
And lastly, describe Dopesick in one word.
Scary.
All right, bam. Hey, you know, we got through them. There's got a little couple seconds on the clock there. You're pretty good at that.
Yeah. And a little very obtuse answers to very straight questions.
That's amazing. Checco, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. And thank you for your contributions to the creative arts. Your work has inspired countless, and I, for one, adore your creative palette. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to having you back on the show to discuss your next project.
Thank you so much. Looking forward for the show, and call me for the next one. It's going to be a fun one. It's about rock and roll and music.
There we have it. Rock and roll and music. Checco Varese, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.